So when Pastor asked me to speak today, he's been doing this series on rebellion, and he's been asking a couple people, like, I know it's going to be a pretty rough subject, a little heavy material, so he thought maybe if I have a couple people break it up, and it won't be so much heavy stuff all the time. And unfortunately, well, I'm going to actually continue with what he's talking about. Because I want to take a little inset. He's talking about rebellion. I know he's just revving up right now, so he hasn't really gotten fully into the meat of it all yet. But I'm going to take a little detour and explore a little bit of the psychological aspects of rebellion. So when I think about rebellion, I think about the Israelites. And how did they rebel? See, whenever they rebelled, they turned from believing in God to meet their needs and fulfill their longings, and then turning to false gods for those things. It's a constant pattern. They start grumbling and complaining. You see it all the time in Exodus as they're journeying through the wilderness. Their needs aren't being met, at least not the way they wanted, so they start grumbling and complaining, and then they go to some other god. So they stop trusting in the one who actually has been meeting their needs the whole time. So doubt comes in, fear comes in. They doubt, and then they change who they're going to trust. And that's the cycle. You see it definitely throughout the book of Judges. It's this constant cycle. They'll be in the covenant, they're following God. Then they start to rebel, and they start following other gods. What's God do? Well, you just violated my covenant. So now I'm going to lift my protection a little bit. You're going to be oppressed by some other people, and then you're going to be like, oh no, Father, save us. He's going to save you. Things will be good. Rinse and repeat. So you see that constantly. So when I think of rebellion, what I think of is idolatry. See, each god that they would go to, most of your gods throughout ancient mythology, they were a god of something. They were a god of a certain need or longing. So the god of fertility, the god of prosperity, agriculture, strategy, war. Most of your major pagan religions were about having gods of certain needs, areas of life that people relied on. And so people worship these gods by praying and sacrificing to idols. Now, those idols are just images. They're supposed to be representations of these false gods. The idol is not the god in itself. It's a representative of the god. So, what does modern day idolatry look like? I got a friend who sometimes he'll text me or he'll send me a picture of something like some new technology. And he's like, is this like new modern times idolatry? And I'm like, well, I mean, maybe. And so when we speak of idolatry in the church, at least when I was growing up, what I heard was things like TV, that's an idol. Football, that's an idol. Your boyfriend, your girlfriend, those are idols. And those aren't necessarily wrong because they can be idols. But here's the problem. People assume that it always has to be an object or a thing. So that's why they name those sort of things. Now, they could be idols, but it's based off too simplistic an idea of what an idol is. No one worships an idol for the sake of the idol. They worship it for what they can get out of it, what need can be met through it. So what they're actually worshiping is not the idol, it's that longing, that thing that the idol or that false god is supposed to fulfill. So if they're worshiping the goddess of fertility, like the ancient Israelites, they worship Asherah, fertility goddess. They're worshiping her. They're not worshiping her necessarily. They're worshiping fertility. They're worshiping the thing that she's supposed to give them and bless them with, and then through her. So they're doing both. It's not just that they're worshiping her, but she represents fertility, and that's what they're longing for. So, in psychological terms, what do we call idolatry? Actually, you know what? I'm going to get into that in just a second. So here's what sparked this for me. So I'm teaching Intro to Psych at the University of Valley Forge. And I was going over, before we got into the whole subject of emotions and before we're going down that route, after we studied the brain, I was like, you know what, let's take a detour. I want to make sure we settle something here first about what our motivations are. And so I ran through what some of the theories of motivation are, why we do the things we do. So I'm like, I wasn't planning on doing a PowerPoint for today, but I thought, you know what, let me take one of my lessons from my class and modify it. So I tore it up a little bit and threw some other stuff. So let's go to the first slide here. I'm going to speed through some of this stuff. So just to give you a sampling, a little survey of the theories of motivation that have existed. So your main theories are the drive and arousal theories. And those are the ideas that you have biological needs. You have hunger, thirst, sleep, sex, aggression, anything to help you fight to survive. And so you just biologically need those things, and so you get the urges, or you get like a craving to satisfy that. And then there's the arousal, which is similar to drive theory, but the arousal theory is like, well, maybe the amount that you need of those certain things, it sort of changes based on your homeostasis. And homeostasis would mean the systems that's inside you, if they're at optimal levels, and there's harmony in the systems. So those are two main biologically based theories that pretty much dominate the field for the longest time. They don't necessarily anymore. Now, Sigmund Freud was the big drive theorist for a while, and his big theory was that we're dominated by a desire for sex and aggression. So everyone thought he was a little too sex obsessed. He talked about it all the time. But its reason why is because he looked at it as, one, from an evolutionary point of view, that's what helps the species survive. But also, whenever you experience any sort of pleasure, the brain sort of automatically assumes that whatever feels good must be important for your survival. So it makes sense when you look at his developmental theory that he called a psychosexual theory, because he looked at what makes a baby happy at different stages of life. Getting fed. Okay, oral stage. So that's where the idea comes from. Most people get offended by that, like a baby being sexual. No, it's like the baby is driven by pleasure, and the pleasure must mean it's important for survival. So that's where that's coming from. But he was very much a drive theorist, meaning that there's not a lot of conscious thought that goes into this. It's very deterministic. So we're just driven. Something else is moving us. Something internal, something outside of our control and outside of our awareness. Okay, keep going. All right, so then you have like the incentive theory. There's more like your behavioral theorists. They get this idea that, well, you need something outside yourself that you're striving for. So whereas drive theorists say there's something inside you that's pushing you, the incentive theorists say there's something outside you that's pulling you. So like saying a reward. You're looking for more money, and it gives you prestige or more options in life. So that thing you're looking for, it's like that carrot on a stick, and you're like running for it. So it gives you that idea that there's something to strive for. It's an incentive. Keep going. All right, there's instinct theory. Similar to drive theory, but it's like we have these instincts that are sort of built in. And this is where you get a lot of ideas about archetypes. So there's just certain patterns that are built in. We don't need to know exactly what their purpose is necessarily, but we just sort of follow them. We just have these patterns that we inherit and we go after. All right, keep going. All right, individual psychology. So then you had Alfred Adler, who was a student of Freud, but then he sort of diverged. Now, when you know the lives of some of these theorists, you get a little picture into why they came up with their theory. He was like a really sickly kid, had a big family. He was constantly in competition with his brother for the affections of his mother. Like he just was always feeling inferior. And so his theory was people are driven to feel superior, to conquer feelings of inferiority. So that's where you get the ideas of inferiority complex. That's from Adler. So the main idea here is, all right, what are our greatest needs? What is the greatest thing we're longing for? Superiority. All right, keep going. Then you get the existentialists. And they're like, all right, it doesn't take some trauma in childhood to make you realize that life is hard. Sometimes all you need is just awareness of the whole world to realize, wow, existence can be really difficult. So that's where if you focus on that too much, you can sort of get this sort of existential depression. But you have some people there that say, well, basically it just means that life is meaningless. So our greatest desire, our greatest longing is to find meaning in life. And that's the idea behind Viktor Frankl, who developed logotherapy. And he was a Holocaust survivor, went through Auschwitz and another one of the concentration camps, and he observed people. There are some who just cracked, couldn't handle, and he endured. And one thing that kept him was he kept believing that he can find meaning in the midst of just suffering that seemed to be meaningless. And so he developed some ideas about, well, if you create something, if you work, if you interact with people, you can find some meaning even in the midst of suffering. So there's another idea, all right? So you got maybe the highest thing we can go for is finding meaning in life. So we got the drives, all right? We're driven for biological needs, sex and food and aggression. Maybe it's just to feel superior, feel powerful. Maybe it's just to find meaning in life, okay? Keep going. Some other theorists who are like, well, maybe it's not just one thing. Maybe there's a few things we're going after. So before here, there was also choice theory. That was by William Glasser. He developed reality therapy. It's like, well, we need a few things like love and accomplishments, fun. Those are some of our basic needs. And the most important is love. And so he would say that's a major thing that we need, love and acceptance. Well, then you get the humanists. And we sort of figured out that, well, maybe there's a hierarchy of needs. So it's not just one thing, but maybe many, but maybe there's some that are more important than others. But you don't really get to some needs until you satisfy some other needs first. So you have Abraham Maslow, who came up with his idea here. Most people know this one. So you start off with your biological needs, like Freud was saying. And you got to at least have food and shelter, and then your safety, all that stuff. And then you go to esteem needs, feeling like you're a part of something, or that people look up to you, that you have value, self-worth. And the social needs, that you got connections with people. I did it backwards. And the greatest need, now here's the crux, is self-actualization, to be your authentic self. All right, so think about this. The humanistic point of view would say, at the top, your greatest longing, your greatest need is to actualize yourself. Okay? Does anyone see anything wrong with that? Okay. Now, they had no problem with this idea because, from a humanist point of view, people are basically good. So they don't see any problem with making yourself as the highest ideal. The greatest thing to strive for is to be more yourself and to actualize yourself and express yourself more and to value self over everything. Because, well, people basically good, so as they do that, they'll also be good toward other people. Okay, let's look at how that's playing out right now. I think we're seeing the fruit of years of this sort of indoctrination, this idea that people are basically good. And I think about the Vegas shooting. And from what we know, he didn't seem to be like ideologically motivated. He wasn't like he wasn't a Muslim terrorist. He wasn't like a religious fanatic as far as we know. So why? And I think when you don't have a higher value that is beyond yourself, you will see that ultimately life is meaningless. And just to destroy life seems like a pretty rational solution to that. That's what I think is the motivation for a lot of these mass shootings, because they lost what the value in life is, what existence is. And so to them, why even let it exist anymore? Let's just end existence. So when you combine the existential problem with this humanistic idea that you're at the top, well then I also have the ability to right this problem so that I'm going to end existence. And that's what I think we're seeing the fruit of. All right. So when I'm going over this in my class, I'm going crazy on the marker board. I'm like, here's this idea and this idea. And I'm like, what is the problem with all these ideas? And I would say the problem is every theorist, they're like that like the illustration of the bunch of blind men who encounter an elephant for the first time. And so you've probably heard this before, but you got one elephant who's holding like the tail, and he's describing what type of animal this must be. It must be like a really long, like lanky, and just kind of like wiry animal. And one's holding the ear. He's like, oh, it's like a manta. It's like real floppy. Then one's holding the tusk. It's like really armored. It must be really tough, like smooth, like plated armored animal. One is holding the belly. He's like, this is a big fat animal. So they're not wrong, but they're only seeing one piece of the puzzle each. Combined, they would get the whole picture. So when I look at that, I would say there's actually multiple areas of longing. And I went over this before when I spoke last year, I think, when I was going over shame and guilt. So I prefer to use the term longing, because most others will go over the idea of needs. And I think longing is more accurate because we think of needs as, like, say, the biological requirements, hunger, thirst, stuff like that. But I prefer longing because there are some things you may long for that you might not biologically need necessarily. It doesn't mean that it's not important to you. It doesn't mean that you're not going to strive for it in some way. So I'll use that over like motivations and needs because it includes everything. And the reality is a longing may include something that you might not actually fulfill. And that's like the hard reality of life. There's things in life you may long for forever and never see its fulfillment. All right, so I would say here's a more biblical approach, is that we have 7 areas of longing. Now, they didn't start off as longings. We were originally made in the image of God, and we were originally made in perfect union with Him. So when we were perfectly united with Him, we didn't have needs. Everything that we now think we need was already fulfilled. They were benefits. There are benefits to being in right relationship with God. But after the fall, those benefits became longings. So we long for survival. Adam didn't need to worry about his survival. What did God do? He took care of all his needs. He put him in a garden. What's a garden? Garden, or paradise, rather. The word paradise means enclosed garden. So it was protected. And in a way it was protected, when you read in Genesis, the way it describes Eden, it was surrounded by Euphrates and the Tigris and a few other rivers that served as a barrier of protection. I don't know what from at that point, but still, it was enclosed. There was safety there. It provided all his physical needs. There's food, more than he could need. And yet, he had to go and have the tree from that one, fruit from that one tree. But still, all his needs were met as far as biological needs. The system, it had, actually, let's go to the next one so you can see what I'm talking about. So, the safety and survival needs. You got peace and harmony, which I would say is like same thing as homeostasis. Feeling like you're whole and that everything's in your life, the different systems in your life are in unity. He had those things. There was nothing lacking. Love and belonging. Now here's what's cool, okay? We have horizontal needs that are mostly pertaining to this life and relationships in this life, and we have vertical needs that relate to our relationship to God. And his vertical needs were perfectly met. He was in perfect union with God. They walked together. That's why I hate the idea of evolution, because I really believe that Adam was probably one of the smartest guys on earth. If he was made perfect, now he probably wasn't wise, but if he was made perfect, and I don't have any reason to doubt that he was very intelligent because he walked with God. And God, he was the first man. So we had no reason. He didn't have any defects yet. He didn't have any mutations to hurt his genes or hurt his intelligence. So his needs were perfectly met in his relationship with God. But he gave him the task to go name the animals, and he's out there and he's like, but where's mine? Because he's seeing that this animal has this other animal to mate with and to have together, and he's seeing this one, and he's naming them, and he's like, where's mine? So God realized, it's not good for man to be alone. Now he's like, he should have been happy just with me. No, it's like, well, at least for certain functions, we need each other. So what God does, he doesn't leave it up to us to take care of that. He still provides fulfillment for him. So he met his needs vertically as well as horizontally. He provided the mate for him. So his needs were fulfilled for love and belonging. Identity. Gosh, what an awesome identity. I'm man. I'm made in the image of God. What an awesome identity to have. He was given great honor. He's like, oh, you two, fill the earth. Take dominion over it. That's a pretty cool job description. That's something that says who you are, that you're a representative of God on earth. Power and purpose. He gave him the ability to do things. He gave him a job to do. A lot of people get wrong is they say, well, after the fall, that's when work started. No, actually, he had a job, but it wasn't toil. It wasn't like labor that was exhausting. It was enjoyable. So he had a job to tend the garden and name the animals. That sounds like a cool job. He's actually allowing him to participate in the creative process. It's like, I made these animals, but I didn't give them any names. You name them. Oh, cool. That's up to me? How awesome is that? Freedom and fun. When I speak of freedom, I think of I'm really referring to freedom from demands, autonomy, freedom from stress. So that's a basic need we have. It's a longing because that's what he enjoyed when he was with God. And God even exemplified and demonstrated to him, hey, take a break. Work 6 days, and on the seventh day, don't do anything. And I'll do it. I'll show you how it's done. I don't need to, but follow me. Do what I'm doing. And he enjoys life. And then wisdom and understanding. Now, you'll see here is a bit of progression with how I listed those areas of longing. They're really coming from more biological to spiritual, like on the spectrum. So safety and survival, more biological, and you end with more spiritual, wisdom and understanding. And you see that to please God, what does it say in the Proverbs? The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And how much you should strive for wisdom in your life. It's like when you read the wisdom literature, it's very explicit that one of your greatest needs is wisdom. Seek after it. Seek after understanding. All right, so the middle three. This is where I want to really focus on right now. The middle three are the most central to your personality and your heart. And that's the love and belonging, identity, and your power and purpose, what you do in life. Those are the three that most of us become most concerned with throughout our lives. We want to make sure we're loved. We want to make sure we have a family. We have a community that we belong to. We want to make sure that we're happy with who we are, that we feel like we have self-worth, that we're recognized. We want to feel like we're doing something fulfilling in our life, that we're accomplishing something. We strive for achievement. So those are your most central longings right there that relate to your personality and what, at least on a very conscious level, what you're looking for in life. Okay, now, here's the one issue we have. Each person, whether it's by the way you were raised or just by nature, the way God created you, we all have different strengths. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Some people have multiple talents. Some people just have one. So sometimes we look at our areas of longing and we're like, gosh, these people seem to accomplish a lot, and I can only accomplish this much. I guess I'm not as fulfilled in this area. So we look and judge ourselves by how much other people can do, or how loved other people are, how popular they are, and we judge our worth, and we judge how much we're fulfilled in a certain area by how much other people can. We get this idea in our head, like, well, this is how much I want of something, but we don't measure up. Everyone has a certain level, okay? So like I had a student the other day. He came up to me and after class, and he's like, hey, Professor Rodriguez, can I redo the first 2 quizzes? I'm like, I stared at him for a little bit. And I'm like, are you seriously asking me that? like, you're not one of my D students. He's like a B student. And I'm like, why do you want to do that? You're not one of my D students. He's like, well, he's a freshman. All right, I'm like, come on. Didn't they tell these students at orientation, if you got A's in high school, you're going to have to work extra hard to get A's in college? And I'm a pretty strict person on that because getting a college degree should mean something. It shouldn't mean you automatically get it just because you're there. So you got to actually work for it. So, and he's doing good, but he didn't do as good, I guess, in the first 2 quizzes. So he's like, yeah, I'm usually an A student. I really want to make sure I get a better grade. I'm like, okay. I'm not letting you retake it just so you can keep your stats up high. And so I'm like, well, how important is this for you? And he's like, oh, it's really important. I'm like, okay, is this like needed for a scholarship? No, I don't think so. It's just I really, really want that. I want to have A's and B's. So I'm like, okay, we're going to have to set up an appointment later for therapy about this. But he has this idea, he has this goal that that's what it means for him to be successful if he always gets A's. And if he doesn't meet that, then he's not successful. So, or he's not worth as much. They're all tied together. Love, identity, achievement, those three areas of longing, they're all tied together. So we judge our worth by how much people like us or how well we perform, or sometimes just by whatever weird ideas we have about ourselves. So some people are really creative, and they determine their own identity. We're seeing this a lot more now. Like I said this to youth group, my first message to your youth group when I became youth pastor. I spoke about identity, and I gave this story because at my day job, I work at a counseling center. I used to be on the phones all the time in admissions. And so one day I got this call from this lady who, she wasn't a client, she was calling for a friend to get directions to one of our offices because she was going to be that other friend's ride to the appointment. So I'm not even going to mimic it because she had like a really thick Eastern European accent. And she gave me her name and asked for the directions. I gave her the address and the directions. And I'm thinking the normal call, about to be done. And as soon as I'm about to finish up, she's like, oh, by the way, I'm actually Happy Hannah, a real-life fairy godmother. And you're now Awesome Andrew. Bippity-boppity-boo, say a wish 10 times, and it will come true. And I'm like, what? I'm like, now, it used to be, you could say, if you believe you're something you're not, that you're insane. And now that's becoming, that was at least 7 years ago or something. Now it's almost like you can't even say that anymore, because now everyone can say whatever they want to be, and you can't argue with them now. But she was convinced. She was not joking with me. And I'm like, wow, she's not even a client. Let's just set her up. So anyway, we get these ideas that this is what we should be. And it's either determined by the way we're raised and the expectations people have on us, or it's just our own expectations for ourselves. And based on how much strength you have, you can be vulnerable to a couple of traps. The one is prideful reactions. So when you look at the different areas of longing, for each of them have an array of prideful reactions, really. But you look at the safety and survival needs. If you're really good at meeting those needs, you're really wealthy, you have no problem, you could be really greedy or just really gluttonous, really, as well. We can have an abundance of stuff, which, hey, some people helped us move. Notice that as well. I got tons of books and comics, and we have a lot of clothes. So sometimes you can see that. Control when it comes to your relationships in life. When you believe that you have enough power to control them, you see that as a prideful reaction. When it comes to your identity, that idea that you're better than everyone else, that you don't need anything, that you're superior. When it comes to achievement and power, we can get aggressive and violent. When it comes to pleasure, freedom and fun, that's where you see addictions. It's getting more and more and more of that thing that feels good. And then when it comes to wisdom, you get people who they think they know it all. So you get presumption. On the next category, the other thing is fearful reactions, where you look at where you're at and you're not where you think you should be. Or legitimately, you're not. There's plenty of cases where on your own, you cannot meet your needs. So we're fearful of our ability to meet those needs. We fear the unknown. We fear what might happen. Because if we can't control something, then how are we going to meet our basic needs? How are we going to survive? So we fear what we don't know. So we try to control every variable in our life. So this is where you see the fears, you see where people make their gods. We fear loss. We fear losing people in our lives, losing things that we depend upon. We fear rejection. And that's one of the big ones that we talk about, the big three. Rejection, shame, which is that fear of people seeing you, that exposure. We talked about that when I preached last year one time. Failure, like the student I was just talking about. He has to get that A or he's a failure. Like, God forbid you get a B. Like, boredom. We fear just not having things to do that are enjoyable. And so that drives some of us. We're always looking to enhance pleasure in our lives. And then meaninglessness. We look at, there's so much stuff going on, I don't understand it. So, but the reality is, you look at the prideful reactions, and pride is actually, it's a defense mechanism from fear. Because deep down, we all know that we're incapable of really meeting our needs. And that ultimately, we cannot fully satisfy our needs and our basic longings. So, you take that and you combine it with certain things about your upbringing, which I won't get into all of that, but it can create different codependency patterns. So that's why I was talking about codependency. So if you go to the next one, modern day idolatry, it's codependency. Now I got to define that a little bit because most people, when they think of codependency, they think of that spouse who's married to an addict and she enables him. And so she's in the marriage for how it makes her feel as a rescuer. It boosts her self-worth. Or she feels like she's taking care of some unfinished business from her own childhood because her dad was an addict and he couldn't be helped. So maybe she helps her husband, she can fulfill that longing to see her dad helped. So and that's true, that's a major type, and that's what most people think of when it comes to codependency. But when you look at it from a biblical point of view, codependency is any excessive dependence on yourself or others. So it's excessive independence or excessive dependence to fulfill your basic longings for love, affection, identity, achievement. When you're totally relying on other things except for God, that's codependency. And that's idolatry in modern times. In fact, it's such a common thing that psychology doesn't really address it until it gets really severe. It's like not until it gets to the point where someone has a dependent personality disorder or an avoidant personality disorder. But they don't actually have a diagnostic category for just codependency on its own. It's just so common. Everyone's got some, at least to a degree, codependent traits. I could tell you mine pretty easily. So there's actually some subtypes right here. You have dependent passive. I mean, they're depending on others to meet their basic needs for love. It's mostly, you'll see that related to love and affection needs. So they don't initiate things. They wait for others to come to them. And they'll act like, well, why don't you do that? They might get passive-aggressive at times if they feel jilted or if they have a grievance. Then you got the dependent rescuer. That's like a very common one, where you're dependent on others to feel important. That might have been the one who was like the hero in the family growing up, the one that everyone else looked to, who was able to be relied upon. And so now in their own relationships as an adult, they rescue others. It keeps them feeling good about who they are. Then you have the two independent ones. This is what most people don't think of as codependency, but it's where you're now relying just on yourself. You don't view other people as trustworthy. You just view yourself as trustworthy. And so you rely on yourself to meet all your needs. But based on your strengths, you can either be a worldly success or a worldly failure. And so you see that play out. The worldly success one, they're probably not going to look for any help until everything falls apart or they committed some crime, because they will cheat to succeed. So it might be that businessman who now finally got caught for breaking some sort of rule. And that's where you got that window to try to reach that person. Because otherwise, they don't need anything from anyone. But then you got the worldly failures. Those are the ones who they don't rely on others. They think they can do everything, but they're not very good at it. So then they still have very bad self-worth. These are the types who will often be spousal abusers. So they feel terrible, so they just make the person in their life feel less than they feel. And that's the way that they can feel good about themselves. So you see that play out sometimes. They got responsibility avoidant. So when it comes to the area of power and achievement, they so they're so scared of failure, they won't do anything. I had a client like this that I just eventually had to take a break from. I worked with him for like 5 years. He was part of my group. And he just was constantly self-sabotaging and always told people why he couldn't do something. I can't. He uses whatever disorder he has as his excuse for why he couldn't meet his own basic needs on his own. He had to depend on others. Why? No one's going to help me. No one's doing this for me. It's like, this is something you can do on your own. But he wouldn't accept that. And he just kept self-sabotaging. I'm like, all right, I need to take a break from him. Because then I'm losing my empathy for him. And like, it's really hard for me to have positive regard for this guy. So then you got a relationship avoidant. They've been hurt too much. So they avoid people. But they still need people. So they have a hard time figuring out the right boundaries to have people. So those are different types of codependency. And you'll see there how that plays out when it comes to idolatry. You're either idolizing yourself or you're idolizing someone else. And when it comes to idolizing yourself, you might not necessarily say, no, I'm not idolizing me. No, you're idolizing your education, your wealth, your work ethic, your morals, how good you are. You're looking at those things as your measure for how successful you are. So you see that there's still a dependency on something or someone. All right. So for me, my temptation is I waver between that rescuer, hence why I'm like a therapist, and that independent worldly success person who just at a certain point I'm like, all right, I don't want to deal with your problem anymore. Okay? I don't want the drama. And you see this in my life where sometimes I'm there for people and then I get hurt from being the person who helps them to, all right, no more. I'm taking a break. So that's me. I can tend to waver between those two. All right, next. All right. So to drive this home, dependence on yourself or others for fulfillment of our longings is sin. We don't like to think of that. We look at this as, well, it's a personality trait, but it is idolatry. Sin, and I always use sin in the broadest sense because based on what its definition actually is. Sin is to miss the mark. To miss the mark of God's design and his intent. When you look at that, you can realize sin is a lot broader than we tend to think. We look at sin, we just think about the 10 Commandments, or, well, if it's explicitly stated in Scripture this is wrong, then that's a sin. But to really understand sin, you have to understand what the design is, what the purpose of it is. Then you can understand sin. That's sort of like the issue, like I was talking about with Narth earlier, where there's a bit of contention between us and the growing movement in the world for postmodernism. Because it used to be something was a disorder if it violated the purpose of something, if it wasn't following its natural design. Even if you're just talking about medical conditions, that if it doesn't match the biological design, then that's a disorder or an illness. But you're seeing that change even in the medical world. We had a doctor, he's an MD, who trains students, and he was sharing how they look at even medical conditions from a postmodern point of view now. If someone were blind, they would say, well, I guess they weren't meant to see. Whereas before you say, well, you have eyes. That means you're meant to see with your eyes. So if you can't see with your eyes, then there's something wrong with your eyes. But now you're getting people who are actually saying, well, if the eyes aren't functioning, or you can't see with your eyes, then I guess that person's eyes weren't meant for seeing. So this is the logic we're getting into now, where everything is subjective. But when you understand what the purpose of something is, what its design is, then you can understand that to violate that is what sin is. And here's the thing. It's by design that we cannot meet our needs on our own. The whole system's rigged. This is what I try to explain to the students. Like, we can strive for perfection. You can strive for superiority, for love. You can have all the love you want, but you'll ultimately know that you cannot meet all your needs. Only God can. He rigged it so that you have to come to a point of dependence on him. He rigged the system. It's in his design that you can only be fulfilled through him. So the key is not to seek the fulfillment of the longings, but to seek to glorify God, because that's what happens when you're in union with him. See, when God made Adam, he made him in his image. Think about that. He created this entire globe, and he created someone made in his image. So right there, there's his signature on his creation. As a master artist, he signed it with Adam. But then what does he tell Adam and Eve to do? Go, increase, multiply. What's the net result of that? More images of God all over the face of the earth. That glorifies God. If we're to glorify means to shine forth the attributes of someone. So as we reflect him, we shine forth those attributes. That gives him glory. For us to be who God created us to be and then do what he created us to do is to glorify him. That's how the rest of the creation glorifies him. A rock glorifies God just by being a rock. A dog glorifies God by barking and chasing dogs. It's doing what dogs do. As long as it's functioning as a dog, it's glorifying him because it's functioning according to its design. When we try to violate our design by trying to fulfill our needs our way, that's not glorifying God. We're actually trying to glorify self. And that's the humanistic model that puts self at top, glorifies self, everything will be good. But no, it doesn't work. You will fall short, and you'll end up in competition with people, and you'll get into wars and aggression, and that's what we're seeing right now in society. We're like at the brink of a civil war as a culture right now, because everyone's trying to glorify their identity, and we don't want to compromise. We don't want to surrender our identities to Christ. So this is where we're going to run into some conflict in the years ahead, or months or weeks ahead. But the trick is not to look at your longings. It's like, don't worry about these things. So most of you guys know this passage, but let's turn to Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor, the richest man on earth in history, was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? I mean, replace that with your needs for clothing, your needs for food. Replace that with your needs for love, your needs for self-worth, your needs for achievement. It's the same principle that applies. If that is how God, so do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. See, don't seek after the longings. Don't seek after their fulfillment. It's a trickle-down effect. Seek his glory, his kingdom, his righteousness, not your righteousness, because you can't make yourself right. We don't stand before God with our righteousness. It's with his. So seek his righteousness. And all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So, like I said, we moved yesterday. I really did not want to move. This is because of some ongoing conflict with these new landlords we got back in March. And long story short, they just became really increasingly hostile. And really, I couldn't trust them, some of the things they're doing and saying, to the point where they're pretty much harassing me in some ways. So one thing happened, and this was, they had been telling me for a while they're going to raise our rent, okay? And I was like, okay, and I don't want that to happen, but sure. When will we know the amount? And they said, oh, it'll come in September. Okay, well, when will I know in advance? Like, you're going to give me some actual notice, right? I find out 4 days before September what our new month will be starting in September. Raised $140, okay? I'm livid, okay? I don't like people pulling a fast one on me, or I don't like being controlled, okay? So the anger rises up in Andrew. And now it was 4 days before, and I'm like, I got to send my rent in. So I'm at work, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get home. I'm going to write out the check for the regular amount and send that in. And, too bad for him. He missed out. But then I'm at work, and I get an email from him. Oh, here's the new rent amount. I'm like, ah. So I get home, and I'm like, you know what? It's not right that he waited this long to tell me the amount. I should still be able to pay the regular amount, and then starting October, then I'll pay the new amount. So I wrote out the check for the old amount, and I was about to send it in, and then God convicted me. I was so ready to just stick it to him. I'm like, how dare he? And give me just 4 days notice and expect me to comply. And I was about to, I'm like, nope. If I had already written it and already put it in the mail, then that'd be one thing. But I didn't yet. I'm like, I can't lie. I'm not a liar. I care too much about that. And so I'm like, ugh. And after that, it's just been one thing after another, where they've been harassing us about different things, and I've been trying to be as calm as possible and as courteous as possible, no matter what, and it's been difficult. But I keep reminding myself, vengeance is the Lord's. Because they've been doing some other things where they're even trying to tell us that because we didn't sign a certain paper, that we're going to have to owe them another month's rent. Like, we're moving out. I'm not paying you another month's rent. I gave you more than 30 days notice, and they're still trying to get more money from me. So there's driving me up a wall. So I've been under a lot of stress with this situation. But at the same time, I haven't been worried what's going to happen. They're not intimidating me. It has been working, if that's what they're trying to do, because my trust is in God. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes, because there's times like just with that check, I really wanted to take it upon myself and meet my needs my way, to defend myself, to handle life and handle conflicts my way. But I have to trust God, that he has my back. It's not easy sometimes. All right, so last slide, I think. So, for each area of longing, God provided through the gospel a specific solution. So looking at the big three here, love and belonging, he reconciles us to him. And he gives us a ministry of reconciliation. For our identity and honor, our self-worth and significance, he regenerates us. He makes us new creations. All this happens immediately upon salvation. He gives us a provision right there for our needs to be met. Now, the transformation does take time. We don't always see that we're Christ-like. But it doesn't mean that God, when he sees us, doesn't see Christ. So it's just manifesting that in our lives takes time. It's choosing to, on a daily basis, operate by our new identity, our new nature. Because by default, I want to operate by old Andrew that would have sent in that old month's rent check. And that's old Andrew. And I would rather operate by that sometimes. But I have to choose to operate by the new identity that says, God, you'll meet my needs. You'll provide. Yeah, it's $140 more, and I'm going to feel it, but you'll provide. I'm trusting you. Just like with moving yesterday. I didn't know who was going to show up. Not many people got back to me. And it was still a little tight, but I trusted, God, you'll provide the right people. And they came. So, and then power and purpose, we're justified. That God doesn't count our sins against us. He actually takes people who, his standard's up here, right? His perfection. But by all our works, we're here. And he goes, all right, boom, you're right here. Just by our new justification through Christ, he takes Jesus' righteousness and gives it to us. So that's how in the gospel he meets our longings. So you cannot meet them on your own. The system's rigged that you will need him, if I can get that home. So that is our lesson for today. Welcome to your class now dismissed.